Throughout 2023 and 2024, one of the major themes that I kept emphasizing on this show was that a major disaster involving a commercial airliner was extremely likely to occur in the near future. There were simply too many close calls in the skies happening far too often, especially close to the ground, to come to any other conclusion. Now, many of these mistakes were the result of failures by air traffic control and the FAA, which openly began discriminating against qualified white applicants during the Obama years. So when 2025 began with a low-altitude mid-air collision at the Washington's Reagan Airport, it wasn't exactly a surprising development if you've been paying attention. The signs were all there. Everyone who was paying attention knew that a disaster like this would happen, and then it did. Now, one of the many lessons that we should draw from that mid-air collision is that when a pending catastrophe seems obvious to you, even if you're not an expert in the field, you should draw attention to it. There's a very good chance that you'll be right and the experts are wrong, as they so often are, particularly if those experts are politically motivated, which almost all of them are. When I did my monologues on the air traffic control, every American who travels on a plane in this country, up to and including the President of the United States. This is a threat that, as far as I can tell, no mainstream news outlet or commentator has mentioned. But it is urgent, and federal action should be taken immediately. I'm talking about the very uncomfortable, but also very apparent fact that there are quite a few unhinged leftist air traffic controllers in this country, many of whom have spent the last year or so posting on social media about their plans to sabotage the aviation industry and the United States at large. Several of these individuals are deranged, entitled, and by their own admission, dangerous, and they need to be dealt with. Before we get into specific examples, I want to briefly go back to the mid-air collision over the Potomac in January. There are many factors that contributed to this disaster, including poor flying by the Black Hawk pilot. We know that. But if you ask the White House, and if you listen to the audio transcripts between air traffic control and the two aircraft involved in the incident, it's clear that air traffic control was not entirely blameless. This is the first significant interaction between the controller and the military helicopter that would later crash into the passenger plane. If you haven't heard this, or even if you have, listen again. Here it is.
789, contact Mark today.
Okay.
American 3130, full final.
Hello, American 3130.
Head 25, traffic just off the Woods Bridge with CRJ at 1,200 feet, start runway 33.
That's traffic site request, visual separation.
This difference proof.
This is a useful instruction. The controller is telling the pilot of the Black Hawk that a CRJ aircraft, the passenger plane, is just south of the Woodrow Bridge. And he gives its current altitude and some information about its approach. And the Black Hawk pilot acknowledges the information, saying they'll steer clear of the CRJ. But the controller doesn't seem to notice that the Black Hawk over the next 30 seconds does not, in fact, steer clear of the airliner. Instead, the two aircraft are on a collision course. It's not until an automated alarm sounds in the control tower, warning of an imminent collision, that the controller notices the issue. So listen to what he says at that very moment. Listen.
Pass 25, get the CRJ in sight. Pass 25, pass behind the CRJ.
This cloud has a aircraft in sight, precision separation.
This difference.
American 4782 by bat number and visual.
American 472, Washington, 1 star, 32017.
All right, this is Win. Did you see that?
Now, this time around, at a critical moment, the controller does not tell the Black Hawk helicopter where the CRJ is or what its altitude is. He doesn't say, avoid the CRJ at 10 o'clock at your same altitude or anything like that, something specific like that. Instead, he simply tells the Black Hawk pilot to avoid the CRJ. And it appears that in response to that vague instruction, the Black Hawk pilots scanned the sky for a CRJ and identified the wrong CRJ in this very crowded airspace. So, they were avoiding the wrong plane. And this was obviously a critical mistake, one that the controller shares responsibility for. Although, to be clear, a small portion of the ATC's command wasn't audible in the Black Hawk because the Black Hawk keyed their radio at the same time. So, as we said, a whole combination of factors went into this. Now, after the crash, it emerged that Washington's Reagan Airport normally has a dedicated controller who focuses solely on helicopters, but at this particular moment, one controller was doing double duty, handling fixed-wing planes in addition to helicopters. In an interview with federal investigators, the controller stated, quote, "There was one point that I thought about asking for backup, but it was, as soon as I was thinking about it, I got rid of a few helicopters, so it was a little complex, but it was manageable for me." Now, I'm beginning with the crash above the Potomac because it illustrates a couple of facts that are very important to keep in mind. First of all, air traffic controllers are apparently capable of an extraordinary degree of self-deception. After all, when you allow two aircraft to fly into one another, by definition, the situation was not manageable. But more importantly, the crash illustrates that air traffic controllers, if you needed this illustrated for you, air traffic controllers have a very important job. Even with all the automation that we have, They are a critical line of defense against aviation disasters. Our lives, when you're in a plane, your life is in the hands of these people. And therefore, they should behave professionally at all times, even when they're off the clock. You shouldn't have to worry that these people are, insane or sociopathic. You're paying their salary. You put your life in their hands. And in return, at a minimum, they should demonstrate that they're not crazy. But many air traffic controllers are instead demonstrating, particularly on Reddit, one of the, of course, largest social media platforms in the world, they're demonstrating that, alas, they do not clear this very low bar. So let's back up for a second. On Reddit, which is especially popular with leftists, you'll find plenty of forums where employees of various organizations, from Panera Bread to Walmart to McDonald's, anything, they talk sort of shop about their experiences on the job. And very often, as you might imagine, the posts are extremely negative. And that's why they're there. People are airing out their grievances and making all kinds of highly inflammatory statements. And sometimes the posts are threatening or reveal signs of obvious mental illness. This is very common on Reddit in general. And all things considered, that's, probably fine when you're talking about the guy who's making your sandwich or boxing up your flat screen TV or whatever. But it's not so fine when you're talking about somebody who has the capacity to kill hundreds, if not thousands, of passengers in a matter of seconds. Air traffic controllers, unlike the delivery guy at Jimmy John's, can direct two planes to collide if they want to, or if they aren't competent enough to avoid doing so. They can order planes to perform unnecessary maneuvers that put passengers in danger, and they can certainly cause all kinds of major inconveniences that cause significant problems for the millions of people who populate airports and airplanes every day across the country. And if something like that does happen, it can be very difficult to prove that the controller did it on purpose. I mean, he has plausible deniability. He can claim he made a mistake. This is the power that air traffic controllers have, and therefore they need to be vetted. They need to be sane. And there really cannot be any question about that. And yet, if you look at various subreddits that are frequented by air traffic controllers, you'll find that, we have a pretty big problem in this regard. There are a slew of posts, all of which are really easy to find, in which air traffic controllers demonstrate that they are unfit for the job. And I'll give you just a few random examples. You can go and find many more for yourself if you want. And to be clear, most of these posts receive support from the community. So we're not just talking about one or two random trolls. We're talking about dedicated communities for this profession where they're openly talking about committing acts of sabotage on the job. They're also, in general, at least on these forums, very unhappy people who are extremely bitter about the Trump administration to a degree that is pathological. So we'll start with these comments from the ATC subreddit. These are in response to a post from Donald Trump's Truth Social account, where Trump used a meme to mock government workers for being lazy. And just for the record, this is the modern age, and the president is posting SpongeBob memes. It is what it is. Now, needless to say, the air traffic controllers didn't find this meme to be especially amusing. So here's what